kind introduction, and good morning, everyone. It's a great honor to be here. I think the only German Finnish speaker on the whole conference. So that is a great honor to be here. Yeah, I was asked to say a couple of things on maritime security challenges from adversaries. And obviously, there are so many of them. I can only highlight a couple of things that I personally find particularly interesting, noteworthy, but it's not an attempt to be comprehensive. So let's maybe start with Russia. Oh, next slide, please. So just last month, it was leaked, as it sometimes happens, that apparently Western services think that Russia installed subsurface sensor equipment on the wreck of the MS Estonia. It's a ferry that sank in 1994. It is a protected grave site, which makes diving around the wreck illegal, at least to the countries that care about such things. And this is just one example of what's going on in the Baltic Sea, where Russia is at a disadvantage, actually. So it is perhaps an exaggeration to call the Baltic Sea a NATO lake now. It's a bit of an exaggeration. But in the subsurface domain, it's quite clear that Russia is at a disadvantage. The Russian submarines aren't suitable really for the Baltic Sea. So the German and Swedish and even Polish forces have an advantage. So subsurface sensor equipment to locate submarines is one of these ways that Russia is trying to struggle against the position of the maritime underdog in that area, you could say. Next slide, please. And we know also from Britain, already in 2022, apparently, there were explosive charges found installed on British cables. That is another thing that was leaked. So that was after the start of the Ukraine war that this was apparently discovered. And there are reports that, as you can see, it's from a press report, about 167 non-military Russian ships have conducted 945 suspicious activities near critical infrastructures in the North Sea. So that is another example. We just heard about that in the keynote, these zigzagging fishing vessels and so on. So these included all kinds of civilian ships, not just fishing vessels, also cargo ships and tankers and so on. So these activities have occurred in the EEZs of many different countries, and not just in the Baltic Sea, to be clear. Next slide, please. So we know that Russia has also some particular capabilities that other countries in NATO do not necessarily have in terms of operating in the very deep seas. The GUGI, the Russian main directorate of deep sea research, has some very interesting equipment, including that submarine that you see depicted here, the Belgorod, and the smaller, the Losharik, that suffered a fire accident but is being repaired, and the Paltus. So it's little submarines that can be set free from the Belgorod. And some of these submarines are apparently intended, as far as we can tell, also to go into thousands of meters of water depth and manipulate or sabotage, for instance, undersea cables at such depths. So the Baltic is a very shallow body of water, 80 meters roundabout is usually where these cables run, but in the oceans, you have, of course, much larger depths. And I'm not aware anyway of many Western countries having similar focus on the very deep sea as the GUGI has. So this is Russia basically apparently prioritizing such efforts in the deep sea domain. And of course, it is tied to the Russian bastion defense, of defending its bastion in the Arctic near Murmansk, where it's basically trying to establish a no-go zone for others and protecting that bastion, which is a reasonable approach to take if you want to ensure the security of your ballistic missile submarine. So that's maybe understandable. Let's turn now to China for a moment. Next slide, please. So China has presented a bit of a changing and also somewhat murky picture of maritime challenges to NATO. So This is just some press reports on China's dealings with the Houthis. If you remember the Red Sea crisis that has now begun to subside a little bit, there were numerous reports of China apparently cutting deals with the Houthis, supporting the attacks, delivering critical materials, also information, and in exchange for free passage for the Chinese ships, and probably profiting also from this distraction that the Houthis created and from the troubles they caused. So that is one aspect of Russia supporting, you could say, rogue actors. Not that they're not engaging in rogue actions themselves. We know that they have developed a full playbook of hybrid warfare in the Indo-Pacific. Next slide, please. So we have already heard yesterday of this amazing large shipbuilding capacity that China has been able to generate with Western countries' extensive help, by the way. So they got French and Japanese and Korean and American investments in their shipyards and were able to innovate. And now this is, however, a new stage in the Chinese catch-up, starting from a originally very low level of naval capability. Over a couple decades, they have become now naval innovators, really at the top tier. So this is just to show you 3 different examples of shipbuilding innovation from China, ships that nobody saw coming, as I like to call them, because these are really ships that are not in service anywhere else, but have been built by China for very specific purposes, like this large helicopter dock ship that has an electromagnetic catapult on board. We don't know yet for what exactly, launching drones or even fixed-wing aircraft. These landing barges, probably for overcoming the problems of shallow beaches in Taiwan. And then this very intriguing small nuclear battery submarine, where a prototype was constructed that sank at the pier. But make no mistake, prototype sinking is not an indication of the program stalling or anything. Apparently there were maybe 2 built even, so we don't know exactly. But this is a submarine design that contains a nuclear microreactor that would give it complete air independence from outside air. It would make the submarine, give it an unlimited, basically, underwater endurance and higher underwater speed than conventional diesel-electric submarines can achieve at the same level of quietness. So if they can get this to work, these are very lethal area denial weapons for sure. So what is behind China's drive for the underwater sphere? Next slide, please. So they have basically began to focus on underwater domain awareness. Not so long ago, maybe 10 years ago, I would say, were the first signs. And this is from a technical journal article from China. It shows you a demonstrator system that was already built and is operational between the Chinese island of Hainan and the Paracel Islands. And this is basically, you can see, it stretches from the seabed up through the water column and the air column to particular satellite constellations that support the system. It is basically an attempt to create a networked anti-submarine warfare domain awareness infrastructure. It consists of fixed installations on the seabed, multiple mobile, UUVs, USVs, but it integrates with manned ships and fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters, and all of that data is collected, sent to data processing centers that use AI algorithms to sift through this enormous background noise from the ocean and pinpoint the information about, for instance, foreign submarines. So this has become a massive focus of China's activities, and it's not limited to the South China Sea or the near abroad. They have a vast ambition of extending the so-called marine information network basically across the globe. So let me show you some evidence of that. Next slide, please. This is a picture taken from a brochure by the defense electronics conglomerate CETC, collected at a defense fair in 2017. So it's probably maybe 10 years old. And it shows you that there's short-term goals, medium-term goals, and how this system is supposed to start in the Chinese near abroad and then to be extended throughout the maritime Silk Road countries. Next slide, please. And this shows you that there's really a global ambition for this. So basically, they want to be able to cover the entire globe. Third stage, building global marine information network to serve the peaceful development of the marine exploitation and utilization. So in Western countries, when these information products are distributed, it stresses search and rescue and fisheries protection, all these civilian functions. But if you look at the Chinese language versions of these, they often say it's about target acquisition and so on. You know, so it's very funny how they play with the inability still of many Westerners to read Chinese characters. And please, next slide. So this is another source. That is basically an article from a research article published in 2019, and it has the same information. So it's not just one data point, basically has the same information and lists these milestones for the Ocean Information Network. And in 2050, the ambition is to have the so-called Oceanic Polar Information Network. So it's what we just heard about Svalbard. I have to say, a friend of mine went to Svalbard. She's a Newsweek reporter with fantastic China expertise, and she found Chinese scientists working there on Svalbard that belonged to CETC, to that company that distributed that brochure, the defense conglomerate CETC, and that had affiliations with the Chinese military research institutions. So unfortunately, I believe they are working on this project there. Next slide, please. And there's also other evidence of this polar oceanic push by China. This is an article published in 2023 that talks about a massive success planting listening devices that were operating in the Arctic ice and under the Arctic ice. So this article explains that they placed these sensors, and then for several years they were able to gather data from them. So they worked better than anticipated. It is just one of these projects that could not really happen without Russian support. China is quite dependent on Russia's support for these activities. Next slide, please. And another indication that Russia really has nothing against that is the Coast Guard memorandum that was concluded between the Russian FSB Coast Guard and China for joint operations off Murmansk, so very close to Norwegian territory. And interestingly, they want to jointly combat terrorism, illegal migration, fighting smuggling of drugs and weapons, which are problems that we all know are very prevalent, of course, off Norway, right, out in the Arctic. All of those terrorists up there need to be combated. Anyway, there's lots of other indications of Russian-Chinese cooperation. They conduct polar hydroacoustics symposiums of Russian and Chinese scholars working together from the defense-related research institutions since 2019. So there's a joint effort to become top dogs in the undersea domain rather than underdogs. And next slide, please, which is also my last one to hand over to the next speaker. I just wanted to bring up these anchor dragging incidents in the Baltic Sea, just to tease about it, to show you a map of the Baltic Sea and where these cables and also electricity cables, and in one case, a gas pipeline, were cut. 3 of the 4 ships that did this had some sort of China connection, were either China flagged or Chinese owned. Very interesting, but the question is an open one, whether the Chinese state had advanced knowledge of these plans. Right now, they have actually decided to put the captain of the first ship that cut cables, that was the New Polar Bear, on trial in Hong Kong. So the guy is now facing a criminal prosecution for aggravated sabotage and criminal conduct. The Chinese authority did this after denying for more than a year that anything happened. So this is an interesting turn of events. We will see what comes of it. And I wanted to just leave it here and hand over to the next speaker because I've probably gone over time already. Thank you.